The floor is. Thank you so much. Enjoy, everyone.
Okay, well, I mean, it's best to get stuck right in because we've got quite a bit of content that we want to cover. And at the same time, we want to make it super engaging for everyone. So we'll start with quick introductions. My name is Zuleka. I'm going to be your co-host alongside Ivan. Before we kickstart into the meat of the webinar, I just wanted to start with a little bit of context as to why we talk about agility and innovation and work in that sort of space. My background's in delivering large-scale transformation projects for semi-governments. So if any of you have visited or lived in the Middle East, some of the most iconic developments that you see have probably been built by the organizations that I've worked for. The Big Wheel is one of them, even though it's on pause at the minute. And usually what tends to happen when organizations are developing these projects, they're delivered over decades, but here in the Middle East, of course, that does not happen. They come up in a couple of years. And my role in these kind of organizations has always been to bridge the teams, provide the tools and the mechanics in terms of operations so that the teams can actually deliver. Of course, when you're doing something of that scale, of that magnitude, one of the most significant challenges is navigating that really delicate balance between speed and this sort of adherence to best practice frameworks or processes. And often when we're racing against time, we find ourselves compromising somewhere along the lines. And when that happens, and I'm sure many people have experienced this in their organization, the different parts of the business start pulling in different directions and teams start working in silos. And unknowingly, they start working against each other. And that's the sort of fragmentation that I've come up against time and time again. And it's so detrimental to the business and what the business is trying to achieve. And that's why I focus on agility and innovation in the work that I do. It tends to become this critical piece of the puzzle, which brings, in a nice balance, it brings together speed, efficiency, best practice. And while I especially focus on the structural aspect of agility, I work very closely with Ivan here, who addresses the other piece of the puzzle, which is on around people and culture. So I'm going to let Ivan introduce himself.
Thank you very much, Zuleka. By the way, I'm super excited today. One, because we have the opportunity again to be together. So you are my favorite innovation guru. This is number one. Second, I'm super happy because there is a lot of people who has already requested for some information. Let me tell you a little bit about me. So my name is Ivan Palomino. I have been working in the corporate strategy area for close to 18 years, mainly in the corporate world. And probably 10 years ago, it happens that I was confronted with some of the realities of work. So I was given to the lead of managing a transformation in a big American corporation. And thanks to that, in fact, it happens that I grew up my interest on behavioral science. And this is what I do in my day-to-day life. I apply behavioral science for helping organizations take care of the human side. Now, it was that opportunity that I got a couple of years back made me realize that, one, we were putting aside the human side when there was a transformation. And in most of the cases, when there is a failure, it happens because we did not understand the human psychology of change. And that has to do a lot with the agility and understanding agility from what is happening in our brain. And I think today we're going to be talking a little bit more about what happens in the brain of people when there is big changes on where you are telling them, let's do things in a faster, quicker, cheaper way. And if you want to contact me, use the QR code that will direct you to my LinkedIn profile.
And that's, I think organizations tend to, and Ivan will correct me if I'm wrong, but he knows we've both experienced this together. Organizations tend to focus on one or the other. They tend to, the people side gets lost, and the structural side becomes sort of entrenched in bureaucracy on what people think are best practice. So we want to challenge some of those ways of thinking. We want to make this session interactive for you guys. We did promise that, so we're going to throw the next question out to you. I'm going to see if I can shift this without. There we go. So here's a question for everyone. Throw your comments in the chat box, please. What do you think is the biggest roadblock to achieving agility in your organization? We have a small group, but I'm hoping a growing group. Any comments, anyone? Knowledge, that's a common one. Yeah, change is always very, very difficult. I think one of the things that we want to address in this presentation and through the work that Ivan and I do is make change a constant, whether it's in terms of mindset or in terms of structurally, in terms of the way the organization is structured. Lack of clarity and direction, that's a really good one. We're definitely addressing that today. Common understanding and goals, very similar. Yeah.
Collaboration and conflicting priorities. That happens very often, and we're going to talk about it.
Yeah, I'm glad that you're saying things that we're going to touch on.
In the meanwhile, I just want to highlight this part about the change. So human biology. So in our brain, there needs to be something, some signal in order to protect us from danger. So we have been built through our evolution. We have kept these small signals that the brain is passing. And whenever there is a big change, that means that we need to take a call between having fear or confronting the change, the thing that is happening, the danger. And that has been done in order to protect us. So change is not the most human thing in the world. Human is escaping the change, is staying in the status quo, not changing. That is the best for the human brain. But we will talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, what tends to happen is when we talk about agility and we throw that question out, a lot of people also talk about the same elements. Maybe you didn't mention some of these things there, but they talk about persistence and resilience and trying new things, or the change element and the learning, which is all true and they're all super important. But on their own, they can seem quite arbitrary. One of the things that we found is that agility really needs to be anchored into the organization through its strategies, through its structures, through its processes, through its systems, and then lived by employees. And so that's how Ivan and I are going to approach the topic today. You've already seen Ivan talking much more about the individual, the people level, which obviously filters up into cultural level. And then you'll hear from me sort of from the organizational context as well. We will try to keep an eye on the chat box to make sure we don't miss anything. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a very quick overview of how this session is going to be structured. We'll do a very quick introduction to the concept of agility in the context of our conversation today, because it's obviously a huge topic. We're going to define what it means, why it's crucial. And then from there, we're going to go into 3 critical elements of agility. And for each one, we're going to take a top-down approach and a bottom-up approach. And so the 3 elements that we're talking about, someone mentioned anchoring or goals. We're going to talk about customer centricity. This isn't typically considered when we talk about agility in an organization, but we're going to talk about it or explore it in terms of how it acts as an anchor to focus the agility efforts, because we all have to be on the same path to achieving the common goals. The other point that we're going to look at is on iterative progress, continuous improvement, but also sort of embedded in this concept of simplicity. So we'll look at how the organization can be structured and people can be taught to embrace that constant change mindset, and to solve real human problems in a super simple way. And then the third element that we're going to look at is that concept of failing fast and learning. So we'll look at how organizations can still have a risk profile, but they can benefit from that experimentation and learning that really comes with failure, that only really comes with failure, so and not just. And then finally, we're going to look at some practical steps that you can take in your organizations to start or become better at being agile, or even individually, which Ivan will cover as well. Okay, so on to the crux of our session today, understanding business agility and what it means. Look, at its core, it's about being prepared for and open to change. It's not just about being flexible or reactive. If we create the culture and the structure that proactively anticipates change, whether those changes in the organizational context are market conditions or customer expectations or even internal dynamics, you should be in a position to quickly pivot. And if you think of it in the context of always being in this perpetual state of readiness, where you don't just respond, but it's a constant, then it becomes a strategic advantage. So the example here is, my little GIF here, is of the Formula One racing. And that really does epitomize strategic agility. They don't just see, okay, it's raining, let's figure out what to do. They have a whole, they're prepared for a whole array of scenarios. They anticipate them. So they have this library or this repertoire for each pit stop and a plan for every possibility that they're constantly building on. So if there's a sudden rain shower, they swap the slick tires for wet. If there's a collision up ahead, they plan the pit stop so it coincides with the safety car. And we've, as viewers, when we're watching the Formula One, if anyone here does, we've seen how this kind of agility can change the game and can result in winners that maybe weren't ahead of the curve at the outset. So it's not just about responding to changes, it's about leveraging those changes to your advantage. And that's what we mean by strategic agility. And then having and building this toolkit is essential, but it doesn't work if we don't have the sort of dynamism at a human level, right, Ivan?
Exactly. And I love this example of Formula One, because you can have a magnificent engine, the best technology possible, but if you don't have the teams that are able to react, to change the tires, the driver who is able to forecast where is the direction going, what could be the changes that happen to the road, to foresee the future, and that is trainable, by the way. So we cannot win the race. So the human side, as well as the technology, can make you be successful. Unfortunately, in many cases, organizations think about the engine, about the technology, without thinking about how do you help people to be more able to be agile. Now, what I want to discuss here in terms of what prevents people to be agile, I want to discuss about 4 different elements that are anchored in human psychology, that are the frictions that prevent you to be agile. So the friction number 1 is inertia. So our brain prefers the status quo because it protects us for something that we cannot foresee the result. Our brain doesn't like to don't know the uncertainty of too many changes, the uncertainty of the future. So we prefer to stay as we are. The status quo is the natural element. The second element of friction that happens in organizations is effort. So if the organization feels like I have to do so much effort, the change is going to require that I learn 10 new skills, that we do a project for 10 months where I'm not going to be sleeping, people are going to give up. The third element is about emotions. In fact, the possibility to reduce the anxiety for the future. And people, in fact, reduces anxiety if they are part of the change, if they have been the one driving the change, or the ones contributing to the solutions that happen in organizations. And very often we hear the stories about the CEO wanted this, and this is the direction that the organization can happen. And then we are going to use like a beautiful change management model, and things will happen by magic. People will follow. Unfortunately, 90% of the change management models do not consider human psychology as part of the journey. They use some marketing techniques, like kind of ads, in order to encourage. But if you think back again about the Formula One, if you put more fuel, the car will not go faster. That's the thing. So, but we still believe that if we talk about it all the time, and if we are encouraging continuously people, it will work. No, it will not only work if you do that. You have to face the typical human frictions that we have. And I want to discuss about the last point of friction that we have in organization, is reactance, is when people feels like they are being pressurized to change. So, and building like a genuine interest in the journey to change in order to drive agility will help that people are going to accept, and you are going to reduce the friction. Obviously, in order to reduce friction, training is not enough. So you can teach them design thinking, lean startup, whatever methodology, that will not change the mindset of people. It needs to be, and you have mentioned it, Zuleka, just before, it's about creating the culture, the common traits, the common behaviors and attitudes of the organization in order to drive this agility. It's not only about training. And that was one of the big learnings that I had back in my days, that I thought that it was, you put the money, you put the trainings, and change will happen. And I was completely disregarding the human side. That was the origin of my interest on behavioral science on that.
You know, it's not just that. It's not just on learning. What tends to happen with processes as well, we start by creating processes, and people, once they have processes, it's like the rule book, so I can't deviate. And if it doesn't cater to a situation that's, playing out, then they create more processes to go with it. And then before you know it, it's become this whole bureaucratic red tape of a mess, because people, rather than training people to think like, okay, let me understand the context, this is guiding principles, we refer back to the safety net, if you like, of processes. And that is, of course, the antithesis of agility, doing that. Okay, we're going to go on to talk about the three principles, starting with customer centricity. I say principles, as more the drivers that we talk about in this webinar. So, I mean, you all heard me mention earlier that those competing priorities in an organization mean that can often lead to a very disconnected business. And the reason it's so crucial to agility is that it anchors focus so that the entire business, irrespective of function, has one singular direction, much like rowing. So in essence, when we talk about customer centricity, it's about integrating that customer focus into all parts of the organization, whether it's the strategy, the structures, the systems, the processes, and from a people perspective and a learning perspective. And when that focus is super entrenched into the way that the business works, it's going off on a solo tangent to do something that doesn't serve the customer focus or the customer need isn't going to happen, or it's unlikely that it will happen. So what does this look like in terms of a business? If we look at it in terms of structure, things or elements that can support with agility involve cross-functional teams that work together to improve customer experience. It can also mean mimicking the customer journey through the organizational structure so that their customers have this seamless experience across touch points. It could also mean having decentralized decision making, so that the teams or the employees that are closest to the customer have the ability to make decisions. Especially in larger organizations, especially here in the Middle East, we tend to have very centralized decision making, but the people that are making the decision are usually quite far removed from the front line. And then the people on the front line, Ivan will tell you, will give up and they will just go, okay, this is what I'm being told to do. I don't have a vested interest in client satisfaction. The other structural element that we can use are systems to help us really understand our customers better. So we look at CRM systems or other customer feedback systems and use data analytics to understand customer behavior and preferences. And this gives us this real-time feedback to help make sense of any quick actions that we take when we're being agile. So it can inform some of that decision-making. And then I touched on processes as well, providing enough structure to get things done, but loose enough to allow for context-specific decision-making. I'm sure many of you have come across Zappos as the ultimate example when it comes to this. And the way they do things, it's a little bit different. When they're hiring people, regardless of whether it's C-level or frontline, everyone spends some time working on the front line in the customer service centers, dealing directly with customer queries. So that, you know, this really puts the customer experience front and center, irrespective of role. And then the second thing that they do very well is removes that complexity in processes and KPIs. So they have a framework and guidelines for resolving customer queries, but it's up to the agent or the person responding to the customer to have the autonomy to decide what's the best solution to fit that unique customer's needs. And one of the things I really like what they've done there, which most call centers do not do, they've removed the KPIs, traditional customer service KPIs. Usually you find that they're time bound. You need to take a set number of calls per hour. You need to keep them to a certain time limit. They've removed all of this at Zappos. So they don't want you to prioritize quick calls or number of calls over quality service. And that, again, is exemplified in their processes. So in doing that, they maintain this laser-like focus on the value that's added so that they can adapt quickly and effectively to respond to customers' needs. So Ivan's going to tell us what this looks like from a people and behavioral perspective.
Zuleka, you just spoke about one of my favorite examples, Zappos, retailer online, early in the internet era. The thing is that their company mission has nothing to do with the company mission of most of the organizations. The company mission is to deliver the wow through service. So it's not about having a net promoter score or having a share of market target. No. It is something that is a little bit more inspirational. So in fact, Zappos employees are encouraged to go above and beyond to make sure that customers are happy. So they have even used the tagline, their business is to deliver happiness to customers. Now, everything started in Zappos with a pain. So as any delivery service, they had problems of high rotation, people being unmotivated, and also, by the way, very low margins when they launched their business. And that's how they decided that they were going to be focusing more about their employees. How do you transmit this mission of delivering wow through service to the whole organization, not only to the sales or customer service, but even the finance guy or the guy who is doing the accounting or the guy who is pulling some reports gets to participate as a team, as a collaborative effort in order to win the battle. Now, before we move on, I wanted to ask you, the audience, one question. And you have to tell me in the chat if it is true or not. My first question to you is, did Zappos did the following? every employee got a bonus based on net promoter score from customers. Is it true or not? Every employee got a bonus based on the NPS, net promoter score from customers. Somebody say true. Okay, somebody else wants to say false? There is a lot of truth. So people are going to the direction, you guys are going to the direction that every employee got a bonus based on the NPS from customers. The sad reality, guys, is that there is no financial reward for KPIs. The bonuses are made by group and it doesn't have a fixed KPI. And I think Zuleka mentioned it, that they have a little bit disregarded this constraint of having a number. So Zappos do not use any bonuses based on the net promoter score from customers. I have a second question. Is it true or not that Zappos did the following? After 2 months, where new employees come to Zappos, they are offered $2,000 to leave the company if they feel that they are not a match with the culture. So I repeat, after 2 months, new employees get offered $2,000 if they leave the company, if they feel that they are not a match. I think that this time everybody got the point. Yes, the cultural fit is so important, they will pay you to leave. So that if you feel that you are not a match, good luck, find another job. That is excellent. So you have the choice. So the culture, the definition of the culture in Zappos was the starting point of driving this customer centricity. And for that, in fact, everything started with having a clear purpose or a clear mission, creating opportunities to have challenges so that people feel that they are becoming a little bit better. And self-actualization in human psychology is super important. That means that we want to become the best version of ourselves. So people need to have the opportunity to make their job more interesting, better, improve it, to be hands-on in terms of how you improve your own task in the day-to-day. You need to be able to foster empathy. So people need to know the customer stories. Anyone, the accounting guy, the marketing guy, whoever needs to be able to know the stories that come from the customer, the testimonials, the feedback, so that they can assess how to improve. Of course, it is important to have to design and to have processes that are customer-centric. But the thing is that it's not about the process itself. It's about the use of a simplified version of decision-making so that you can do things quicker. So the opportunity to learn, for instance, I don't know, I am throwing design thinking. It is to use it in a recurrent basis so that it becomes a kind of a habit that you use in your thinking process every time, to have the customer, the pain of the customer as a central origin of any task that you will be doing. And something that we always forget is that in order to drive this customer-centric behavior, you need to be able to recognize the effort, to celebrate individuals who are doing the thing. This is not a number. This is a doing, how you do things in your day-to-day basis, and that you are capable of recognizing these people, describing, in fact, what they did in front of others. And the last point, you cannot have customer centricity if people do not have autonomy. They don't have the possibility to decide on their own how to independently service the customer. They need to have a little bit of empowerment or enablement so that they can find solutions on their own. It cannot be a list of rules to make. What do you think about that, Zuleka?
Hey, I mean, I'm going to touch on it on the next section, so I don't want to spoil it yet, but completely agree. So I am going to go straight into the next section because I'm too eager to wait. So the next part of what we look at is aiming for this simple and intuitive design through progress. I mean, it's quite easy when we look at progress, we think about the Big Bang, we look at the Chat GPTs of the world, but what we forget is even Chat GPT was born out of this tried and tested innovations. It didn't come overnight. We tend to celebrate the big wins, but forget about all the steps that, or the continuous improvement, or the small steps where we reassess and adjust our course based on feedback and learning. So I want to share, I'm an absolute geek, Ivan will tell you. So I'm going to share my example. I'm going to share my example. One of my favorite ones is Discover Weekly on Spotify. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. They curate a playlist for every user every week based on the songs that you listen to. But if any of you remember when Spotify first came out, this Discover Weekly was absolutely rubbish. They relied on extensive user data and feedback. They tested lots of different algorithms and models, and they constantly improved the whole system based on real user behavior rather than arbitrary metrics. I know a lot of people tend to go towards demographics, but they were relying on user behaviors and preferences. What is even better than Discover Weekly is how they then took the concept behind Discover Weekly and capitalized on it. I don't know if any of you run, but they've created this Running for You playlist. And what's incredible about this, and it blows my mind, is it adjusts the music you like to match the beats per minute of your run. So if you fancy a really slow jog, you can find running at 130 beats per minute, and it has a playlist for you. If you want to sprint, it's got a running version of the same kind of music that you like that's adjusted to 200 beats per minute. And that's where you get to with iterative progress and relying on this sort of concept of simple, intuitive design that caters to people. So how do we get that from a top-down perspective, from a business perspective? How do we do that? This is the bit that Ivan touched on, and I think it's so crucial. We tend to focus on automation as the cool thing. But if we automate those repetitive processes that consume so much of our time, it frees up people to focus on things, on the tasks that genuinely create value. So you can think, you can be creative, you can do things that will add value to your customers. I read, or I was at an event where I heard the scariest statistic, which I know is true, but it still sounds scary reading it out, hearing it out loud, is that when you go to a doctor's office, 60% of a doctor's time is spent, the doctor is spending 60% of the day typing notes instead of focusing on the patient. And so when we think about how we can embed automation into someone like that's day, then they're focusing on the patient and adding value where it is valuable. The other part of Spotify especially is this concept of intuitive design. And it doesn't matter, it's not necessarily about your customers, it could also be internal as well. If we focus on this simplicity in our processes where they become so natural that they become second nature, we're not spending time and effort generating invoices or chasing up with customers or, updating records. And then the third one that I want to mention is we strive for collaboration over bureaucracy. So if we have these, and I mentioned it before, lean cross-functional teams that can make decisions quite quickly instead of getting caught up in this web of extensive hierarchies, you generate value. At Spotify, they use a concept called squads to come up with their innovations. And then the last part, which is just as crucial, is information systems. If you have real-time data giving you real-time feedback, you can try and test lots of things and adjust course quite quickly. And that, of course, allows you to focus on where the value is, like Spotify did with their behavioral analysis. So Ivan, of course, is going to tell you systems alone and processes alone are not enough. You need to have the people capabilities to match. Am I right?
I think that you stole my line, Zuleka. But anyways, but first, let me dwell a little bit with the story about squads because it's quite interesting what it produces in people. So squads, if you haven't heard about it, is like kind of self-organized and cross-functional in the groups that you put together composed of individuals with different set of skills and expertise. So they work either on a challenge or on a goal. Let's solve the problem of the list. Let's solve the problem of doing better advertising. Let's solve the problem of synchronizing the activity with the music that you hear. So that's a challenge, a common challenge. So a group of people coming from different departments. And the main idea is that it produces this creation of squads as they are designed, groups that are autonomous, like easy that they are capable of taking the decisions, they can take their own decisions, and they are empowered to take this decision. So the authority is on them, so they feel a little bit more driven. And that's the part where I want to go into the psychological effect. So when not only in the business side, you will have like more efficient communication and decision making, but from the people side, we are touching something that drives what we call the intrinsic motivation. So people who are driven not because of the money they're going to receive or because of the titles. By the way, in the squads, everybody is the same. There is just like a product owner who is just facilitating. He's not the boss either. So, and the concept of intrinsic motivation is how do you make that people are going to act with a mindset that is agile, and they're going to act also in a way that is aligned with human psychology. Brain doesn't like big changes. The brain likes changes that are very small, that where there is less uncertainty. And the only way to reduce uncertainty, by the way, is to have some data and to do small changes. Big changes can have big uncertainty. Small changes, like you are working on an app and you just add a new feature, that's small changes. That doesn't have so much uncertainty. So in order to get it back to the concept of intrinsic motivation in order to drive agility, people need to have the possibility to be autonomous. Number one is autonomy. So what am I going to do? How am I going to organize my job? They need to have the sense of mastery, that like a sushi master, that you become better because you have been doing the same activity, but every time you make a micro improvement until you master the thing and you become recognized. Because so we as humans, we don't like to be told how to do things. We as humans, we want to become better, but on our own rules. So, and we need to have just the ability, the possibility to become better. And then there needs to be a purpose. Like this story about solving a challenge is a stronger purpose than saying we need to be number one in Abu Dhabi, or we need to have a customer satisfaction level of 8 out of 10. That is a number. We humans, we only react to relatable things that are emotional. If they tell us we are solving a problem that is going to make the life of people better, yeah, let's do it. If they tell us you can decide how you're going to organize your job, with whom to work, or even which squad you are going to be joining, yeah, let's do it. You have the possibility to access people from different backgrounds in order to become better. Yeah, let's do it. So intrinsic motivation is when you don't have to pay someone. By the way, there is even research that shows that paying some bonuses, financial bonuses, the impact can last a couple of days. So we get a big bonus of 5%, we will remember it for 1 week. We get a bonus of 20%, we will remember it for 3 weeks. But then the reactions, the motivation to keep on progressing or contributing to work declines. Simple intrinsic motivation can give you fuel for 1 year, 1.5 years. And there is research to prove that.
And one of the things that helps intrinsic motivation is experimentation and learning. And this really does mean endorsing an environment where calculated risks are encouraged. And I say calculated risks slowly because CEOs and business leaders tend to freak out when they think they're going to explode budgets and mistakes are going to be made and drown the business. But if you have, or if organizations can strike this balance between encouraging experimentation and managing risk, it works, right? And this is where you have something like a mitigated risk framework, where you set these allowable limits and budgets for experimentation, and shifting the focus of risk teams so that they're not focused on finding problems, which many risk teams are traditionally set to do. Not saying they all do, but that's typically their goal. To risk teams that are designed to enable these business objectives within a defined risk tolerance. A couple of organizations that do this really well are like Patagonia and Google. Both of them give employees about 15 to 20% of their time so they can experiment and come up with solutions. And if you didn't know it already, the outcome of that for Google was products like Gmail and AdSense, which are some of their most profitable products. So you can see crowdsourced innovation has a lot of value, but if you create the framework around allowing employees to experiment, that's where the value comes in. And then the other thing that many organizations really struggle with is this degree of transparent communication. A lot of them talk about it, but in this context, it really does involve sharing clearly what has been tried, tested, who's working on what and why, actionable feedback. And this level of transparency means that everyone, maybe who's not necessarily in the experiment, is learning from each experiment, whether it's a success or a failure, and they can use that information to build on their own experiments. And then on top of that, something that Ivan and I are hugely invested in are immersive learning programs. Programs are not just about, of course, building knowledge, but they encourage the practical application of that knowledge. So I know Ivan's going to give us some more context from a people and learning perspective. He's ready.
Zuleka, so the thing is that we have been formatted in terms that success is about never failing.
Yeah.
So it's our parents, it's the society, any institution that we have been around, they have been programming that. And by the way, if you don't know it yet, 95% of our brain is like a collection of memories, norms that we store. And these norms define our perception of the future. Like, for instance, saying, women are not made for science. I'm saying that to Zuleka, who is a mathematician, by the way. Anyways, so this belief is anchored in a lot of people, and then we believe that, so we don't try science because somebody has been repeating constantly the same and again. But there needs to be a way to, in fact, to be more aligned with our ability to learn through experience, because that's the only thing that generates enough emotions and enough anchoring. What we need is to have the memories to remind ourselves that something exists, to create connections inside of our brain that will remind us that, and be like this gut feeling that we have, intuition that is not really that something magic intuition. It's something that we have embedded, recorded in our brain without us knowing. So, and there was this interesting study from the University of Arizona that people learn best when they are challenged to grasp something just outside of their standards, of their bounds of their existing knowledge. When a challenge is too simple, we don't learn anything. Likewise, we don't enhance our knowledge when the challenge is so difficult that we fail entirely or give up. So too much failure or not enough challenge, there is like a sweet spot. And this research has calculated that the sweet spot is about 15% of failure. This means that we should be failing about 15% of the time when we are trying to learn something new. Without failure, there is no anchoring, there is no real experience that we can remember and reuse in our day-to-day work. So failures are a way to learn. You have already mentioned a couple of examples. I just love two examples that I'm going to quickly say. Is the one about Netflix with the no blame culture. So nobody's punished for making mistakes, but you need to be openly talking about what you learn. Exactly. It's not about doing the mistake and we don't talk about it. And then there is another company, Atlassian, who did this Trello thing that I love, this tool in order to organize for people who are not tech, organize project management. So they celebrate failure. So, but the thing is that you need to celebrate once you have disclosed what happens and what didn't work in front of others. So that people start learning and they don't repeat the same failure. In big corporations, unfortunately, I have worked for some of them. When you do a fail, you hide it under the carpet. This is not good. This doesn't help anyone to learn from mistakes.
I'm mindful of the time as well, because we're having obviously so much fun talking about this. We've gone on for a little bit longer, but this is the last section, we promise, and then we'll have some time for questions. So in terms of practical steps on how the initial steps maybe to implement agility in organizations, one of the things that Ivan and I both do together, and we've done it for a number of organizations based here with global representation, involves looking at doing something we call an agility audit. So that it involves looking at your current strategies, your structures, your processes, your systems. And we also look at people from a very individual level as well, to see what's the capacity and where the business is matching up. So I'm going to throw some questions at you that you can ask of your organization today, covering the three elements that we talked about. So for customer centricity, you look at things like how we integrate in customer insights into our decision making. Is the way that we're working designed to actually enhance the customer experience, or is it actually a roadblock? Alternatively, you can ask how many of these parts of the business take time and value away from the customer experience. That's usually a better way of looking at things. In terms of continuous improvement or iterative progress, look at whether you have enough mechanisms in place to facilitate continuous improvement. Are your processes actually intuitive and user-friendly for your employees and for your customers? And are you actually leveraging automation and lean teams to maximize that value that's created by employees? And then finally, for the fail fast and learn element, is there really a culture of experimentation and learning? Do you have a framework to manage risks that are associated with experimentation? And as Ivan just touched on now, are those learnings from successes and failures openly communicated and used to actually improve the way the organization works? And then also delve into the individual level. Do people have the innate capacity to be agile? Where do they need more support? And that could be in the form of immersive learning, or giving them the opportunity to actually apply and try some of these behaviors that Ivan mentioned. And then once you have the answers to those questions, your next step is to build a roadmap. And you can look at quick wins, things like automating a simple invoicing process, establishing a new customer feedback loop, or implementing, we don't like training in the traditional sense, but I'm going to say implementing actionable training or learning programs for a particular skill. And then for long-term gains, which are obviously typically larger transformation programs, but look at restructuring your organization so it mirrors the customer journey. Revisit all your information systems so they're telling you what they actually need to tell you. And the big one is introduce a culture shift towards experimentation and learning, so that people are always ready, so they're not deflecting back to the processes that we talked about before. Just before we go on to questions, I'm going to say that cliche term that they always say in yoga, but agility is about progress, not perfection. I don't think anyone becomes 100% agile over time. It's something that you're constantly striving for. very much like we are as people as well. I see Ivan loved that yoga joke. Does anyone have any questions or comments for us? You can unmute yourself, by the way. You don't have to type in the chat box.
So we have a question
for you, Ivan. That's a really good question.
How do you build psychological safety into the teams in order to create a culture of experimentation? So first of all, thank you very much, Zane, for the question. So the psychological safety is not a training. It's a set of cultural behaviors that start from the top of the organizations, who are the ones driving the feeling of unsafety. So there is behavioral programs that help already to go through the journey with managerial level in order to understand the impact, the awareness that they have on where do they sit in terms of their psychological safety for the teams, the impact of their actions, and micro behaviors that can be practiced in a regular basis, so that this little thing that they have to do very often becomes a reflex without thinking. Because that's the thing, we think that psychological safety is a skill. No, it's a meta skill, which means I need to know, I need to have a mental process to activate it when I need it without thinking. So we help individuals, managers, to understand what are the micro behaviors in order to practice deep psychological safety. It has to be individualized, right? Because maybe it is, I'm a little bit too rough when I communicated. Maybe it is a little bit like I'm giving too much of, sharing too much of my knowledge when the people needs to be prompted. And this practice needs to be individualized, because the challenge for one person cannot be the challenge for another person.
I really like this comment from Paul, because one of the things that we find is, especially here in the Middle East, digitalization is a big thing and everyone wants to innovate. And the mandate is coming very much from the top. But the problem is, if the culture and the underlying systems and structures in the organization are not ready to embrace things like AI, then, you know, it can not necessarily fail, but it can be a very delayed return on investment. And so what we tend to find is when customers are coming to us saying we want to implement a big transformation program, what we tend to find is that you have to really start at the bottommost level to ready the business for change. And that takes a long time. You can't introduce something just simply top down. Yeah, the automation and the analytics is huge value add for agility. It informs every decision. Again, you need to have the systems in place that are that simple, intuitive systems that I talked about to make it easier to rely on that information.
I would say, if I may, that digital transformation is a tool rather than a requirement. So a tool to reach an objective. And this tool cannot be imposed. If it is imposed, very often the digital transformation fails, because nobody's using the freaking tool that you have paid millions, and the expensive consultants who did beautiful slides about it. And disregarding the human impact on the change.
And Zane also mentioned that having that core data set, that's absolutely true. The automation and the digitalization is absolutely useless if the data is not structured and if they don't have the an information strategy. Any last questions? Thank you, everyone. We're just going to end with this. Ivan and I are focusing more and more on the human side of innovation, because, like I said, we tend to find that that's where the biggest challenges are. And if we can get that right, any transformation or change that we want to invest in becomes a lot easier. So if any of you want to pre-register, the QR code is up on Ivan's screen with us looking like we're having a lot of fun.
Anyways,
I love the picture.
oh yeah, we look a little bit funny.
It's always good to have fun when you're working. It's easier.
Absolutely. So this QR code leads you to the waiting list. So it will inform you when we are launching the next cohort. So it's not like you have to register, it's just to inform you when the things are happening. Otherwise, please get in touch with us in LinkedIn. We would be glad to answer any of your questions. Thank you very much for today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a great presentation. So as I said at the beginning, we will be sharing an email with article that Zuleka and Ivan will be writing for the Judge Club. And please feel free to reach out if you don't get the link in the chat. I will be sending the links also personally to our registered members. So thank you for your time and thank you for this great and informing presentation today. So I wish you all the great rest of the day or morning or evening because we have people from UK and US and Gulf region. So enjoy the rest of your day and thank you so much for today's
Thank you, Anna.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.